12 News is your local election headquarters. Now we continue our Where They Stand series on WPRI.com. I'm Ray Bakari. Joining us today is Ed Lambert, who is the Executive Director of the MBAE. And for this edition, we'll be focusing on a question that's on the Massachusetts ballot in November, question 2, which, if approved by voters, would eliminate the MCAS exam from being a requirement to graduate from passing the exam to graduate from a public high school in Massachusetts. Ed, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Ray. It's great to be here.
And before I ask the first question, I do want to note we have a for and against perspective on this question. Ed will be representing the perspective against the question, and we're going to have both of those sides on WPRI.com available. As I mentioned at the top of the interview, if approved by voters, the MCAS passing it will no longer be a requirement to graduate. Can you explain for those watching a little bit of the context on how this got on the ballot and just what's going on with this?
Sure. The Mass Teachers Association in Massachusetts collected petitions and signatures to put this question on the ballot. I'm part of a growing coalition very much opposed to seeing this happen. My organization, the Mass Business Alliance for Education, has been around for about 35 years. And we were part of the effort to create this and other reforms in Massachusetts about 30 years ago, which led to Massachusetts becoming first in the nation in terms of academic achievement. And so we think that those reforms and the money that came with it have been really important for our state, for developing our talent pipeline, but also for equity for our students. And dismantling that, or even by this one measure, would really be problematic, we think, across the board for students. If this question passes, we're going to eliminate the only state graduation standard we have in Massachusetts. We'll become one of only 2 states with no state graduation standard. Instead, every district, every city and town will have their own graduation standards. And I served on the school committee in Fall River back in the 80s, and I remember what it was like before this reform was put into place, that in certain communities we would say it's just good enough for these kids to get by. We had different expectations for different students, sometimes very disappointingly based on their color or the language that they might speak at home and the like. We should have high expectations for all students, and that's what's driven educational improvement and achievement in Massachusetts, and so we're encouraging people to vote no on this question.
If this question does get approved by voters, good or bad, what kind of changes would come about to the education system in the Commonwealth?
Well, certainly this is not the time when the state is trying to be very concerned about its competitiveness economically to lower standards. We've got this high standard. We think it should be maintained. It has worked for the vast majority of students. 90% of students pass this exam the first time they take it. And for those that don't, they have 5 opportunities to pass it before they graduate. And if they fail on each and every one of those 5 opportunities, there are other alternative pathways for them to be able to get their diploma. They can do a portfolio of their work, and if it shows that they've met the standards, they can get their diploma that way. Or they can use their grade point average, and if that GPA is equal to a cohort of their peers who have passed the exam, they can pass that way as well. So it's really a modest standard, but it's one that we think everybody should be held to, because without it, we don't have any urgency to move kids forward. If this passes, we're not only going to be eliminating our only standard, what we're going to be saying to kids in certain districts, in certain schools, that we think you're not good enough to get there. So we're just going to eliminate the standard and hand everybody a diploma for participation, which would be a terrible thing, and certainly something we don't want to see in Massachusetts.
Now, you're obviously on the side that opposes the question. To get the side that favors in a little bit here and to get your response to their points that are raised by them, one of the points that I hear from those in favor of approving the question is that a number of other states don't have a requirement like this, and that having this kind of requirement could put a lot of stress on both students and teachers, especially if like a student passes their classes and meets other standards to graduate. How would you respond to those points?
Well, let me take that from a couple of perspectives. First of all, there are a number of other states who do have exit exams. But even those states that don't, they have other state requirements. If this question passes, we would have none in Massachusetts. And as I said earlier, we'd become one of only 2 states with no state requirement at all. So if you want to look at comparisons with states, I don't think anyone here, even if you don't think that this is the right way to do it, the ballot question doesn't give you an alternative. It's not replacing this standard with another standard. It's simply eliminating all standards. In fact, the ballot question not only would eliminate the use of MCAS as a graduation requirement, it would prohibit the use of any state assessment or district-wide assessment. If we don't have a common assessment, how do parents know whether or not their kids have been adequately prepared for graduation? With regard to the stress, it is not a high-stakes exam when you have to take it. You have 5 opportunities to take it. There are alternatives if you can't pass it. And the fact of the matter is that students take tests all the time. Might be their science midterm or their math final. This exam is no more stressful than that. And given that there are a number of opportunities to pass it, most schools rally around those students who might not pass it the first time and help them get over that bar the second time. Our Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, Pat Tutwiler, has said, and we agree, every student can pass this exam. Our job is to help them get there. That's why Governor Healy is opposed to this question, Secretary Tutwiler, a lot of our state leaders and others. Both the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald have editorialized against it, and they usually don't agree on anything. So the fact is that there's growing momentum for this. We have parents and teachers and business leaders and others who are coming out in opposition.
Speaking of the momentum, let's talk a little bit about what does it look like on the ground when organizations that are against this question are talking to voters, and what's the expectation of the fate of this question? Well,
it's certainly a question that people need to pay attention to. Myself and others are traveling the state. We're talking to groups of voters. It's interesting to see once they can get past the 15-second sound bites, that their information about it grows, and when that happens, they generally end up leaning against supporting the question, hearing about the alternatives, hearing about what the impacts would be. Nobody likes tests, and so as a result, when you just say, well, MCAS is a test, and I have a son or a daughter who didn't like taking it, well, none of us like taking it, but we also take driver's exams. We expect doctors and lawyers and other professions to take exams to show us that they are ready. This is a very basic 10th grade exam that we ask students to pass before they can graduate from 12th grade. We should support our students and not think that they can't get there, because they certainly can. We've got to make sure that we give them all the tools they need to succeed.
And looking ahead for my final question, say November 5th comes, questions is approved by voters. When would this take effect, and what happens next?
Generally, when either a law is passed by the legislature or in the case of ballot questions, it's usually within 30 days. There's a formal process where the governor and the governor's council have to certify the results. It's usually pro forma. And so we think this is actually high stakes for the voters of Massachusetts, that we don't want to go back to the way things were. We don't want to go back to being middle of the pack educationally. We don't want to go back when kids were discriminated against because we didn't believe that they could make it. We really do want to move forward. This is a reform that has worked. Since this reform has been in place, graduation rates have gone up in Massachusetts, dropout rates have gone down, and student achievement has gone up for not only all students collectively, but all individual subgroups of students. So the data show that it works, and that's why we're asking people to maintain the current system and vote no against question 2.
That's all the questions I have. Ed, I want to thank you for giving us your time for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ray.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of Where They Stand. Remember, 12 News is your local election headquarters. We have other interviews focusing on local races for this election cycle and a full voter guide available on WPRI.com. For now, Ray Bakari, 12 News.